Federal agents arrived at my brother's grand opening 40 minutes after the ribbon-cutting photos had already gone up online. Walking past a table of champagne flutes nobody would end up drinking, straight toward the back office where the dealership's real paperwork was kept. I found out from a cousin's group text before my brother ever called me directly, a screenshot of the local news van parked across the street, and I remember feeling mostly a kind of quiet relief that the binder I'd spent 4 months building had done exactly what a binder like that is supposed to do. Before I explain how that binder came together, hit subscribe and turn on your notifications because you'll want to see what was actually in it. Tell me in the comments, have you ever found out your own story had been used for something you never agreed to? Welcome to Revenge Stories Narrated, where family betrayal meets inevitable justice and karma always collects its debt. My name is Amanda. I'm 31, a forensic accountant, and when I was 8 years old, I survived a rare form of childhood leukemia that put my family through 2 years of treatment, a bone marrow transplant, and a level of medical debt that, even with insurance, followed me well into adulthood. My parents started a fundraising campaign during that first year, understandably, the way a lot of families do when a child's illness outpaces what any reasonable person could plan for, and for a long time I assumed that campaign had done exactly what it was supposed to do, cover what insurance didn't, and quietly end once I was well. It didn't end. I found this out 4 years ago, entirely by accident, scrolling through a local community group where someone had shared a fundraiser titled Amanda's Journey Continues, using a photo of me at 8 years old in a hospital gown, a photo I recognized instantly because it sat in a frame in my parents' hallway. The campaign had been quietly relaunched and rebranded nearly a dozen times over the preceding decade, each version using some variation of my childhood illness, my name, my old medical photos, soliciting donations for ongoing treatment I hadn't required in over 15 years. I sat in my car in a grocery store parking lot for almost 20 minutes after finding it, scrolling through comment after comment from strangers wishing me strength, people who believed, sincerely, that they were helping a woman still fighting for her life. A coworker had messaged me a link to an earlier version of the same campaign the year before, gently, assuming I already knew about it and simply hadn't mentioned my ongoing health struggles at the office, a conversation I'd brushed off at the time without understanding what I was actually brushing off. I called my mother, Simone, that same afternoon, careful and calm, the way I approach most conversations professionally before I let myself feel anything about them personally. She told me, without much hesitation, that the money had gone toward family needs, a phrase specific enough to sound reasonable and vague enough to mean almost anything. It took me another 2 years of quiet, careful digging, done the way I do everything professionally, to understand what family needs had actually meant, which was my younger brother Roman's luxury car dealership, a business that had failed to secure conventional financing twice and had instead been running, in large part, on donations solicited under my name for a medical condition I no longer had. The specific number, once I finally reconstructed it fully, was harder to sit with than I expected, even doing this kind of reconstruction professionally for a living. Just over $400,000 raised across a decade of campaigns, the vast majority routed, through a pattern of transfers I was uniquely trained to trace, into Roman's dealership, its lease payments on 3 luxury vehicles used as inventory demonstrators, and a build-out of the showroom's interior that had nothing to do with any medical expense at all. Meanwhile, I had spent the better part of a decade paying down $61,000 of my own leftover medical debt from that original illness, on a payment plan I'd set up myself at 22, never once told by either parent that a fund existing specifically in my name might have covered it. I confronted them together, at their house, calmly, with documentation I'd already begun assembling by then. My father, Grover, didn't deny the transfers once I laid out the numbers. My mother did most of the talking, the way she usually did, explaining that Roman needed the help more urgently than I did, that I'd always landed on my feet, that raising the topic at all, after everything the family had supposedly sacrificed during my illness years earlier, was a particular kind of selfishness she hadn't expected from me. My father added, quietly, that if I intended to make an issue of it, I should understand it might mean not being welcome at family gatherings going forward, a threat delivered so evenly it took me a moment to register it as one. If you've ever found out your own hardship had quietly become someone else's business plan, hit like right now. I'd love to know in the comments if you've ever been threatened with exclusion from your own family for asking a fair question.
I didn't argue with them that day.
I didn't raise my voice, and I didn't agree to let it go either. I went home, sat at my kitchen table, and started building what would eventually become a binder just over 200 pages long. Organized the way I organize every case I've ever worked professionally: campaign screenshots dated and archived, donation platform payout records obtained through formal request, bank statements showing the transfers into Roman's business accounts, the dealership's own lease agreements for the 3 vehicles funded almost entirely through those transfers, and a timeline cross-referencing every campaign relaunch against Roman's specific financial shortfalls, month by month, for nearly 10 years. It took me 4 months, working evenings and weekends around my actual job, verifying every document twice before including it, because I understood, professionally, that half of what makes fraud reporting effective isn't the accusation itself. It's whether the documentation survives serious scrutiny without a single gap an investigator could use to dismiss it. Some nights that meant nothing more dramatic than requesting formal payout histories from 3 different fundraising platforms and waiting the standard processing period for each one. Other nights it meant cross-checking dealership lease dates against campaign relaunch dates on a spreadsheet I kept backed up in 2 separate places, watching a pattern emerge that had clearly been invisible to everyone in my family precisely because nobody else had ever bothered to look at all of it together. I didn't tell my parents I was building it. I didn't tell Roman either, who called me twice that spring asking, casually, if I'd consider investing personally in the dealership's next funding round, apparently unaware that I already understood exactly where his previous funding had come from. Roman's dealership planned its official grand opening for early June, a large event with local press invited, champagne, a ribbon cutting, the kind of visibility a business owner arranges when he wants a community to believe he's arrived. I submitted the completed binder to the state's Charitable Fraud Division and, separately, a detailed report to the IRS regarding unreported income and misrepresented charitable solicitation 3 weeks before that opening date, through the proper formal channels, the same way I'd file any report professionally, with my own name attached rather than anonymously, because I wanted the record to reflect exactly who had brought this forward and why. The investigation moved faster than I expected, though I understand now that a case arriving this thoroughly documented tends to move considerably faster than most. Federal agents and state investigators arrived at the dealership during the grand opening itself, timing that had nothing to do with any request of mine, simply the natural result of an active investigation reaching the point where evidence needed to be secured before it could be altered or moved. I wasn't there. I found out through a cousin's screenshot, then through Roman's own furious voicemail an hour later, then through my mother's, considerably quieter by comparison, asking, for the first time in the entire 10 years this had been happening, what exactly I'd told the authorities and why. My parents' personal accounts were frozen within the same week, once investigators traced enough of the campaign proceeds directly into shared household finances to justify it. Roman's dealership closed within the month, its remaining inventory seized as part of the broader asset review. I haven't spoken to my parents since that week, not out of anger exactly, more out of the specific exhaustion of finally being done absorbing a decade of decisions made in my name without my knowledge. Roman has reached out twice, both times to ask whether I could help him understand the charges against him professionally, a request I declined, calmly, the same way I've handled most of this. A portion of the recovered funds, once the state's process concluded, was directed toward outstanding medical debt tied to the original campaign's actual stated purpose, mine, which covered most of what remained on the payment plan I'd been quietly managing myself since I was 22. I think about that hospital photo sometimes, the one on the hallway wall, the one that ended up circulating online for a decade longer than anyone ever told me it would. I don't know if my parents will ever fully understand what it cost me to be the one who finally closed that campaign down. I know I stopped being willing to let my own history be spent by other people without my say in it, and, for the first time in a long while, that decision belongs to me and nobody else. If you've ever found out something painful about your own life had quietly become someone else's resource without your knowledge, tell me about it in the comments. Subscribe if you want more stories like this one, and I'll see you in the next.